This Parsha Podcast is dedicated in loving memory of Chaim Ben Binyamin, Victor Amram, the father of our dear friend Esther Amram. Victor passed away this week. May his soul be elevated in heaven. We have reached a very important milestone. This is the final episode of year 9 of the Parsha Podcast, and I am recording from a very special place on a very special day. It is Erev Sukkot, the day before the festival of Sukkot, and I am in Canada. That's right. My in-laws invited us to join them for the festival. We have not been here for Sukkot in 13 years. I'm going to miss the sweaty, sweltering Sukkah in Houston. I'm excited for the chili festival. Bundle up all cozy, appreciating the nice hot soup. Most of Chaya's family is already here. We traveled. This time we flew, of course. 10 carry-ons, 2 pieces of luggage. We traveled light. I had to tell my daughter, no, ma'am, we're not bringing your hair straightener. Borrow one from one of your cousins or aunts. But one thing needed to come with me. My trusty traveler studio. We have to record the final Parsha Podcast of the year. It's the eve of the festival. Everyone is in a whirlwind of work. Everyone's busy with all the preparations. I snuck away to the basement. I surreptitiously set up my studio. Clandestine, quiet, keep the voice down. And we're all ready for the Parsha Podcast, the final Parsha Podcast of year 9. Torah is our ID, an idea, and a dilemma on the Parsha. It's an amazing accomplishment. We had a whole year of studying together. A great privilege to study the Parsha with y'all each week. We thank the Almighty for stewarding us, for shepherding us to this point. And we ask and we hope and we pray to please God have another wonderful year of Torah study, year 10 of the Parsha Podcast. Please God, we hope to have a decade of Torah study. What an amazing and joyous accomplishment. We hope and pray that we will succeed in recording, with the help of the Almighty, a Parsha Podcast, one that will enlighten, inform, educate, entertain even, edify us, to deepen our knowledge, to deepen our insight, to broaden our understanding, to be elevated by the Almighty's wonderful treasure, the wondrous, great treasure that He gives us, the Torah. We have big plans for next year, the Parsha backstage, but now it's time for the final Parsha Podcast of year 9. From the surreptitious basement, the clandestine recording with the help of the Almighty. So let's begin. Parshas Vezos is a very unusual Parsha. It's the only Parsha that's not read on Shabbos. We read it on Simchas Torah, which is usually during the week. It's the only Parsha that is always read after Yom Kippur. This year, Ha'azinu was also after Yom Kippur, but many years, Ha'azinu is before Yom Kippur. But Vezos HaBracha, the final installment, the final Parsha of the entire Torah, 54 of 54, is always after Yom Kippur. It's also the only Parsha which shares a Torah reading session with another Parsha. On Simchas Torah, we dance with the Torah. We have great fanfare and pomp and ceremony. We sing. We are in an elated, exultant, ecstatic, joyous mood. We bring out the Torah, we dance with it, and we read it. And we finish it. We finish Vezos HaBracha. And then we roll it. We roll the Torah all the way back to the beginning, to Genesis, to Parshas Bereshis. And in the same Torah reading session, we read Parshas Bereshis, or at least the beginning of it. We start anew. We have the final Parsha of the Torah, the final message of Moshe on the last day of his life. And we roll the entire Torah, all 245 columns, back to the beginning, back to Genesis, back to Bereshis. This Torah reading is always paired, is always matched with the beginning of Genesis. And it's a poignant Parsha. It's the last day of Moshe's life. And it's the last act of Moshe's life, at least an act that he does with our nation. Vezos HaBracha, this is the blessing. Moshe gives a blessing to the tribes of Israel, with the exception of the tribe of Shimon, the only tribe to not receive a blessing on their own. They, of course, are joined together with the whole nation, because Moshe, once he does the individual blessing to the tribes, he blesses the nation as a whole. Moshe goes tribe to tribe and gives some blessings. Up to this point, Moshe has mostly been critical of the nation. And now it's time to praise them and to bless them. And the sages tell us that Moshe's blessing is related to Jacob's blessing. Moshe's blessing on his deathbed is related to Jacob's blessing on the last day of his life on his deathbed. At the end of the book of Genesis, Parshas Vayechi, Jacob gathers his sons. He's in Egypt. He's about to pass. His sons are, of course, the progenitors of the tribes. And he blesses them. And we talked about these blessings many times. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, it seems like they don't receive blessings. But he ends off his blessings and he passes. And our sages observe, if you look at Genesis chapter 49, verse 28, this is the recapping of Jacob's blessings. And it says, these are the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, Vezos, asher diber lahem avihem, and this is what their father spoke to them, and he blessed them, ish asher kivrcho. So each man, as per his blessing, he blessed them. And the Midrash observes that the word Vezos in 49:28 of Genesis, it's the same word that Moshe begins his blessing. The Torah ends off Jacob's blessing with the word Vezos, and Moshe begins his blessing with the word Vezos, Vezos Haberacha. This is the blessing. And the Midrash tells us that Jacob prophesied to his sons, I'm giving you a blessing, and I'm ending my blessing with the word Vezos. There will be another man, a man similar to me, a man similar to Jacob. And he will bless you from the point at which I leave off. That is where he will begin. So Jacob left off with the word Vezos. Moshe begins his blessing with that same word, with that same marker. Vezos habracha. This is the blessing of Moshe. And our sages go even further, and they tell us that the content of each one of Moshe's blessings to the tribes that were spawned by Jacob's sons, the content of the blessings, it's the same theme, it's the same consistent theme that Jacob had in his blessings to these tribes. Moshe picked up where Jacob left off. And after Moshe finishes blessing the individual tribes, again with the exception of Shimon, he blesses the entire nation as one. Ashrecha Yisrael, praiseworthy are you, O Israel. Mi kamocha, who is like you? Am noshab Hashem, a people that were saved by God. Magen Ezrecha, he's your protective shield. He's your triumphant sword. Your enemies will collapse before you, and you shall tread on their back. That's the end of chapter 33. And then chapter 34, it's the final chapter of the Torah. Moshe ascends the mountain. He surveys the entire land of Israel. And chapter 34, verse 5, Vayamas Sham Moshe. And Moshe passed over there. Moshe, Eved Hashem, the servant of God, he passed in the land of Moab, as per the word, the mouth of God. Moshe is given a praise in his death that he did not receive in his lifetime. He's called Eved Hashem, the servant of God. The parsha begins, Vezos HaBracha, this blessing of Moshe, Ish Elokim, the man of God. And now in his death, the Torah calls him the servant of God. It's an interesting question. Why is he only now called the servant of God? But Moshe has passed. And the next verse tells of the burial of Moshe. He was buried. God buried him in the gorge, in the valley, in the land of Moab, opposite the idol of Beis Pa'ar. But no man knows where exactly his burial place is until this very day. The Talmud tells us this is like the last event, the last act of the Torah, the burial of Moshe. Of course, burial is an act of kindness because a person cannot bury themselves. They are dependent upon others to bury them. And the very last act of the Torah, the Talmud observes, it's an act of kindness. Oh, and the Torah begins with kindness and ends with kindness. This is like the end of the Torah, the final event of the Torah. But then we have some more verses. Moshe was 120 when he passed, but he was still at the peak of his powers. His eyes were undimmed. His vigor was undiminished. And the nation mourned Moshe. For 30 days in the plains of Moab, they mourned, they bewailed, they cried over Moshe. But Joshua ben Nun, son of Nun, he was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moshe supported him and the nation hearkened to him and the nation did as God instructed Moshe. And the Torah ends, there was no prophet like Moshe who knew God, so to speak, face to face, who performed all the signs and the wonders that God sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh, to all his servants, to all of his land, ulechal hayada chazaka, and to the very strong hand, and the great wonders and powers that Moshe did, le'enei kol Yisrael, before the eyes of all of Israel. And thus concludes the Torah. 5,845 verses after we began, the Torah ends, we finish it, and we celebrate by rolling it back to the very beginning, and beginning again, Bereshis, bara Elokim, the very beginning of the Torah. There's something very interesting about the end of the Torah, the final 8 verses of the Torah. The Torah records the death, the burial, the eulogy of Moshe. Moshe, the trusty leader, the unparalleled prophet, the Eved Hashem, the servant of God, the Ish Elokim, the man of God, the deliverer of Torah, the savior of the nation from Egypt. He passes, and we read about it. And we have 8 verses that are post-Moshe verses. We read about his death and his burial and the eulogy, and the nation, well, they had Joshua, and they hearkened to Joshua like God instructed Moshe that they should do. But Moshe, he's gone. And there's something very unique about these verses. Many times we've talked about the idea that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah, and that corresponds to the 600,000 souls of our people. Every soul is associated with one letter in the Torah. And when all the souls come together, when they unite at the foot of Mount Sinai, then they're capable of receiving the entirety of Torah, which is a different version, so to speak, of the nation. 600,000 souls corresponding to 600,000 letters. Now, how are these letters / souls organized? So perhaps you recall a few months ago, we shared an idea that the orientation of the tribes in formation, remember the book of Numbers, it's very busy with how the nation is laid out and the different tribes. You have Reuven and Shimon and Gad there to the north, and Issachar and Zvulun and Judah there to the east, and exactly how everything's oriented and how the encampment and the breakdown of the camp and the disassembly of the tabernacle and the trumpets and everything has to go exactly in perfect formation. So there's an idea that we shared that the layout and the orientation of the nation, that corresponds to the layout, to the orientation of Torah. Meaning, you can actually read the entire Torah by looking at the layout of the nation. If you had a 50,000-foot view of the whole nation, and you knew which soul corresponds to which letter, you could read the entire Torah in order by seeing how they're laid out amongst this broad expanse of land. The layout of the nation is not random. It's another way of spelling out every letter of the Torah, every word of the Torah. And you recall we said that the blasphemer, he wanted to encamp amongst the tribe of Dan, because that's where his mother was from, but he was booted, and it was so important that he not encamp at the place that he doesn't belong. Why? For this reason, because the layout of the nation is not random. It's actually spelling out the whole Torah. And each soul, each letter, is completely indispensable. Because the entire Torah is dependent upon having all 600,000 components in the right location. You have one letter missing, one soul missing, and the entire Torah is invalidated. One letter is out of place, one soul is out of place, one extra soul / letter And the Torah is imperfect, but it must be perfect. And thus, if the blasphemer is encamped with the tribe of Dan and he doesn't belong there, he is threatening the perfection, the pristine perfection of all of Torah. So that's one idea, how those souls kind of trace their origin back to the Torah. But there's another idea. The sequence of the letters of the Torah, from beginning to end, from the first letter of Bereshis, that's the bet. It's actually enlarged in the Torah scroll. The first letter of the Torah is actually larger, a larger font, one of the 11 letters that's larger, a larger font. From the beginning of the Torah, from the enlarged bet that begins the word Bereshis until the end of the Torah, till the final Lamed, Le'enei Kol Yisrael, that last Lamed, that's organized from greatest on downward. The greatest souls, the greatest letters are found toward the beginning of the Torah. And thus, the greatest we've ever had. The unparalleled prophet, the servant of God, the Ish Elohim, the man of God, Moshe, he corresponds to the first letter of the Torah, to the enlarged letter Bet. But what happens as you make your way from there on, progressively, it gets to weaker, less powerful, less potent souls. And at the end of the Torah, we're at the lowest level possible. You recall Parshas Vayelech, so we have 4 parshios that all happened on one day. Nitzavim, Vayelech, Ha'azinu, Vezos Habracha. Parshas Vayelech, the parsha starts off, Vayelech Moshe, Moshe went. It doesn't say where he went from, where he went to, what he did, just says that Moshe went. And all the commentaries, and even on the Parsha Podcast, we're trying to figure out, well, where did Moshe go and for what reason? Some of the commentaries suggest that Moshe had to travel, not necessarily physically, but spiritually had to travel. Moshe's on this towering dimension, the highest level. And he has to go to the end of the Torah. And he has to not just to write it, to communicate it, to teach it. He had to somehow associate himself with those souls that are so much lower than his. So Moshe had to leave. He had to depart from his lofty stature in order to connect with those souls corresponding to those letters that are much, much lower dimensions. He had to reduce himself. He had to travel outside of his realm to find a way to associate, to connect with those letters, with those souls that are at the end of the Torah, that are so more diminished or such a lower level, they're out of his orbit. So Vayelech Moshe had to travel. That's as you get to the end of the Torah, it gets less and less. And we have 8 verses that are comprised of letters that really have no association with Moshe. They're the lowest letters spiritually, the lowest souls spiritually. Those are the souls that are maybe divorced from any connection with Moshe. They only have a tenuous, a passing association with him and with Torah. Those are the letters, the souls of the verses that come after his passing. But even those letters are incorporated into Torah. Even those letters are associated with Torah, with the Torah of Moshe, with the most elevated, supernal, and transcendental. We observed that there's only one parsha that you always, always, always read after Yom Kippur. Ha'azinu we read this year after Yom Kippur as well, but most years or many years it's read before Yom Kippur. Vezos Habracha always comes after Yom Kippur. Maybe we can suggest that there's just no way that those souls, that those letters can be part of our cycle of reading unless there's a Yom Kippur. Because after Yom Kippur, we're all cleansed, we're all elevated, we're purified, we're refined. And after Yom Kippur, even those who are maybe so distant, maybe have very little association, only a tenuous passing association between them and Moshe, after Yom Kippur, they too are included. they too are incorporated into this grand and glorious nation, into this wonderful destiny. And it's interesting. The only Parsha that we read two different Parshas in the same reading session, it's Vezos and Bereshis. You finish Vezos at the end of the Torah, and you read those last 8 verses after Moshe's passing. And then something very unusual and dramatic happens. The Torah is rolled 245 columns back to the right. And we begin Bereshis. Those that may be very far are reminded that they are linked together with the very beginning, with the highest, most elevated letters, souls of the Torah. But there's a very serious question. Who wrote the Torah? This may be a simple question, but it's important to be precise in how we answer it. We do not believe that the author of the Torah is Moshe. We believe that the author is God. And we have, of course, abundant evidence to support that very consequential claim. But Moshe plays an important role in Torah. He's the writer of Torah. He's the scribe. He's the stenographer. God tells Moshe, write the word Bereshis. And he takes the word of God and he writes them down. And he gives it to us. We just read last week, Moshe gave the written Torah to the nation. And the last of his life, he wrote 13 Torah scrolls, 13 complete and fully written, fully finalized copies of the entire Torah from the beginning, Bereshis, to the end, through Vezos, through the very end, to the last word of the Torah, Yisrael, the last letter, the Lamed. He wrote it all and delivered it to the nation. Every tribe received their copy, and one copy was placed in or near the ark. What about these 8 verses? How did Moshe write them? He can only write them when he's alive, obviously. And therefore, when he's alive, he had to write the words, Moshe died? Well, that would be untrue. Because if he's still alive and he's writing words that are untrue, and that's not possible, the Torah cannot be untrue. This is a really intractable problem. We are told two seemingly irreconcilable truths. Moshe wrote the Torah, and not just part of it, all of it. Every single word, every single letter. All 600,000 letters of the Torah. But the final 8 verses, they describe the events of Moshe's death and his burial and his eulogy and the aftermath. And those verses, seemingly, it's impossible for him to have written it. This is a solid question. And of course, it's addressed by Rashi. Rashi says, wait a minute. After Moshe Meis, is it possible to say Moshe is dead and he writes the words Vayamas Sham Moshe and Moshe died over there? So Rashi says, okay, here's the answer. Moshe wrote up until this point. Mikan Va'elech, from here on out, meaning the last 8 verses, Kasav Yehoshua. Joshua wrote it. So the whole Torah, it's 5,845 verses. And Moshe wrote most of it. Moshe was the scribe for most of it. The final 8 verses, well, that was written by Joshua. So 5,837 were written by Moshe, and the last 8 were written by Joshua. That's the first idea that Rashi tells us. And then Rashi says another idea. You cannot have a Torah scroll that's a Torah scroll, but also missing even one letter. If it's a Torah scroll but missing one letter, it's not a Torah scroll. Torah scroll's got to be perfect. It's got to be pristine. And we just read, Moshe said to take the whole Torah scroll. He delivered the whole Torah scroll. He gave 13 copies one copy per tribe. So you cannot call a document that's incomplete, you can't call it Torah. So it must be that Moshe wrote the whole Torah. What about these 8 verses? He cannot write them. And for the time that it's not true, it can't be that it's untrue. So Rashi says, well, there's another answer. God told Moshe, write these words. Umoshe kosev bidema. And Moshe wrote it with tears, bidema, with tears. Now Rashi did not conceive of this idea himself. Rashi almost always cites his sources, his ideas from the Midrash, from the Talmud. He curates the comment that most fits with the simple reading of the Torah. And the source of these 2 opinions, it's a dispute in the Talmud, Bava Basra on page 15a. What about the final verses, the final 8 verses? And one opinion says, well, Moshe wrote most of it and Joshua wrote the final 8 verses. Second opinion says, no. Moshe wrote it all, but God told him to write it, and he wrote it bidema, with tears. Now, some of the commentaries observe that the Talmud's question, the Talmud's discussion about the final 8 verses, it really should be the final 14 verses. And the reason for that is because what about the events of the beginning of chapter 34? Moshe goes up the mountain. So he's up the mountain by himself. And he's surveying the whole land. Did he write those verses up while on the mountain? And then they climbed up the mountain, they found that scroll with new verses? It's also hard to imagine. So, why does the Talmud talk about only the final 8 verses? What about those other verses? That's an interesting question. But regardless, the big picture here, we have a problem. We have verses that tell us that Moshe wrote the whole Torah, and we have an impossibility for him to write words that are untrue. And we have 2 solutions. Either, well, Joshua wrote it, but that doesn't really solve our problem, because if Joshua wrote it, well, Moshe didn't write it. But Moshe is supposed to write the whole Torah. The Torah is called the Torah of Moshe. Torah's Moshe. Not Torah's Moshe and a little bit of Joshua. And the Talmud's other solution that, well, Moshe was told what to write and he wrote it. He was crying. You imagine he was crying because it's describing his death, his burial, his eulogy. But how does that really solve the problem? If he writes it with ink, he writes it with tears, he's crying. How does that actually address the core matter that Moshe is writing things that are untrue? He's crying. So what? It's still untrue. So the whole subject really needs to be understood. There's a very masterful comment by the Gaon of Vilna. It's just wonderful and brilliant. And what he says is that actually these 2 opinions are 2 halves of one whole. They're both true. Both that Joshua wrote it and Moshe wrote it, bidema, with tears. And what he explains is something very powerful, very profound. We know that the Torah preceded the world. When Moshe went up to heaven to get the Torah, the angels were very surprised that there's a person, a human, born to a woman, a person of flesh and blood, who's there to get the Torah. And they tell God, well, how are you going to give the Torah to humanity? Why is humanity worth of your attention? Why are they deserving to have your Torah? This Torah, it's your treasure. It's your treasure that you had in your treasure house for 974 generations before the world was created. And you want to give it to humanity? So the Torah preceded the world. Our sages tell us that the Torah was used as a blueprint to create the world. So why are we asking a question about, well, how did Moshe write the final 8 verses? What about all 5,845 verses? All of them. were all said or were all extant in the Torah before the world was even created. So all the events of the Torah were already inscribed in the Torah. So, of course, this question is addressed, and we spoke about this in the past. If you look at the Ramban's introduction to the whole Torah, he says that the Torah exists on two dimensions. We have a Torah, and it's the Torah of God. It's the Torah of Hashem. But the Torah, when it was in heaven, it's not the same format as the Torah that's here. For example, you open up the Torah, you go to the middle of the book of Exodus, and it talks about what happens if an ox gores another ox. Who has to pay? How much you have to pay? What if it was the first time, the second time, the third time, and so on? Do you imagine that in heaven there's a Torah, or there was a Torah, for 974 generations before the world was even created? And that version of Torah, that format of Torah, was talking about oxen, goring oxen? That doesn't make sense. The Torah that we have is formatted for human sensibilities. Says the Ramban, there's a Torah, or there's a version of Torah. There's a format of Torah that's the same Torah, the same holiness of Torah, but it's in a different format. And that format, he calls it's all names of God. The whole Torah, all the letters of the Torah, 600,000 letters of the Torah, it's all names of God. And it's the exact same letters that we have, but it's organized in a different way that it spells out something completely different. It's like the Torah that's relevant to the highest realms. And that Torah, it's the same Torah, it's just not formatted for us. And this version of Torah, this heavenly version of Torah, is described as fire. But it's black fire, meaning the letters, on top of white fire, meaning the parchment. You open up our Torah scroll, there's no fire, not at least one that's perceptible to you. But there is the same Torah, the same letters, the same parchment, organized and formatted in a different way, that's like a heavenly version of the exact same thing. And that version of Torah, the heavenly version of Torah, that preceded the world 974 generations. And that was used to create the world. And Moshe goes up to heaven and he gets the Torah also on that dimension, because Moshe is able to understand it, how it's all the letters that spell names of God, whatever that even means. But Moshe is also able to format it in a way that we understand it. Moshe has the Torah that's in heaven, the heavenly Torah, but he also was given the ability to have the Torah that's formatted to our sensibilities, that we can read and understand and be elevated from. Moshe, he's writing the whole Torah from beginning to end, from the first letter to the last letter. And how does he write it? In which format do we have it? Well, you open up Genesis, and you don't see any names of God. Well, of course, you do see names of God, but you see it in the context of a narrative. You read about Genesis, and you read about Adam, and Cain and Abel, and Noah, and the flood, and Abraham. You read all these things, and it makes sense to us, and it's telling us a story. And it's telling us lessons. And it's written for us. And this is the exact same Torah. And the same letters, but oriented differently. That is a totally different form of the same thing. A heavenly Torah, black fire atop of white fire. That Moshe knew, Moshe was given, and Moshe gave us this human version, so to speak, of Torah. Moshe wrote the entire Torah, including the last 8 verses. But he wrote it in different ways. The first 5,837 verses, he wrote it in the manner that is suitable for human consumption. It's not the names of God. It's not some other version of the same Torah. It's written in a way that we can understand it. It's designed for us. The final 8 verses, Moshe wrote it. Moshe wrote every single letter. But he did not write it in a way that is suitable for human consumption. He wrote it in a different way. He wrote those verses as the names of God, as the black fire, top of white fire version of Torah. The Talmud does not say that Moshe wrote it when he was crying. The Talmud says bidema, which we translate as with tears, because the word dema means tears, but the word dema also means a mixture, a mumble jumble. The letters of the Torah, if you were able to access the earlier version of Torah, it would be the same letters, but mixed up. It wouldn't spell the same words. It would spell other words, the names of God. The final 8 verses, Moshe wrote bidema, with a mixture. In the version of Torah, that the letters are oriented differently. To us, it looks like it's all mixed up. But those letters, the way they were oriented, it was in the heavenly version of Torah as the names of God version of Torah. So it said the letters, Moshe died and Moshe was eulogized and Moshe was the greatest prophet and so on. All those letters that we have, it was those letters. But it was organized in a different way in the names of God version. Moshe wrote it. That's the first opinion in the Talmud. Second opinion in the Talmud, Joshua wrote it. Indeed, that's also true. Joshua wrote it. Joshua wrote it. He didn't write it originally. He took those mixed up letters and organized those letters in a way that we can read it, in a way that spell out Moshe died and he was buried and so on, and he was eulogized. All the orientation that we have, that was done by Joshua. There's no dispute. They're both saying the same thing. Moshe indeed delivered a fully formatted, a fully functional, a complete version of Torah with all the letters, with all the verses. There wasn't a single letter that was missing. But the last 8 verses were bidema, they were mixed up. Because they were written in a way that we have no way to fathom even. It's all hidden. It's all the names of God. Once Moshe passed, Joshua wrote it, meaning he took those letters and reshuffled them and reoriented them, brought them down to our understanding and the way we read it. It's the same letters that Moshe wrote. It's organized now in a way that makes sense to us, and that was the handiwork of Joshua. It's an amazing idea. It's really a powerful idea, and it's worthy of the Gaon of Vilna. I think it's a nice, powerful takeaway lesson as we finish the Torah, the final verses of the Torah. And this whole discussion the Talmud has, and this insight from the Gaon of Vilna, it reminds us of the lofty, the transcendental origins of Torah. The Torah preceded our world. The Torah is the first creation of God. It's what God used as a blueprint to create the world. The Torah that we have, it's the same letters as the Torah that was in heaven in a format of black fire atop of white fire. We have that same Torah. The Torah that we have, it still is the same Torah as in the heavens, but it's here, and we can understand it. It's formatted to our understanding, but it's the same Torah. It's the same lofty, elevated Torah. It's the same Torah of black fire, top of white fire, and we can learn it, and we can study it. How fortunate are we indeed. A dilemma, the last dilemma of this cycle, the Parsha Podcast. Torah. It's so wonderful, sure, but it's intangible. And it may be hard for us to appreciate it. We may have a hard time to connect with Torah study. And certainly, when someone else studies Torah, good for them, but it doesn't do much for us. At least, so we imagine at first glance. We have to choose where to invest our time, where to invest our resources, where to invest our energy. And it's a dilemma. Maybe we should consider something other than Torah. We find a resolution to this dilemma in an unbelievable insight in one of the blessings of our Parsha. Again, the Parsha, the primary part of the Parsha, is the blessings that Moshe gave. Vezos Haberacha. This is the blessings that Moshe delivered to the tribes of Israel before he died. And you read them, they're very powerful, they're very poetic, very richly textured and layered. And in verse 18 of chapter 33, we read about blessing to Zebulun. Ulizvulun Amar, to Zebulun, regarding Zebulun. Moshe said, Simach Zevulun b'tzesecha. Be happy, be joyous, Zevulun, when you go out. V'yisachar, and Issachar be'ohalecha, in your tents. So this is unusual. We have two tribes, Issachar and Zebulun, Yisachar and Zvulun, and their blessings are linked together. They're combined. Why are they combined? So Rashi, of course, tells us. Zevulun and Yisachar, these two brothers, they made a partnership. Zevulun, he was a man of commerce, and he was a tribe of commerce. And they lived towards the sea, and they were always traveling, engaging in maritime commerce. And he would make a lot of money. Issachar, he was a scholar. He would sit in a tent. And his people, the tribe of Issachar, they were tent dwellers. They would study Torah. And they made a partnership. Zevulun would go out to do business and commerce and trade, and would travel to distant lands and engage in commerce and make a lot of money. And he would take his bounty, his riches, his wealth, and give half of it to his brother, Issachar, Yisachar. And Yisachar would study Torah and would take half of the merit of the Torah study and give it to Zevulun. That was their deal. That was their partnership. And therefore, in this blessing, they're combined. And Moshe tells Zevulun, Smach, be happy. You're going out, you're doing business, you're doing commerce, away from your tribesmen, away from your people, away from your land. Be happy, be joyous. You're going to do something very important. Issachar, you be successful, sitting in your tent, engaging in the most profound study of the Almighty's Torah. And the tribe of Zevulun, they were the businessmen. They were the moguls. They were the titans of industry. And Yisachar, they were the tribe that excelled in Torah study. And they would engage in the most difficult portions of Torah study. To know exactly when to make a leap year, how to establish the months, all the astronomical calculations needed to intercalate the calendars. That's what they did. And Moshe is blessing them. Be successful. Zevulun in your part, Yisachar in your part. Continues Moshe. Amim har yikro, the nations, they will call to come to visit. They will be summoned. They'll be assembled on the mountain, meaning in the temple, and they would offer sacrifices of righteousness. This is all part of the same blessing. Ki shefa yamim yinaku, because Zevulun will be nourished by the riches of the sea. Usfune temunechol. You read these words don't appear elsewhere. Many of these words don't appear. They're very poetic. So everyone's trying to figure out what these things mean. Sefune temunechol, treasures hidden in the sand. Now, what does this mean? So Rashi tells us Zevulun's going to do business and go out in the ships to the sea, and he's going to have wealth and riches and treasures, specifically in things that are buried in the sand. He's going to have the treasures buried in the sand. So what does that mean? So the first thing is a tarit, or a tarith, which is some sort of fish. It's some sort of exotic, very expensive fish. And that's a fish that's hard to get because it's in the sand, and it's very valuable. And then there's the chilazon, that's the snail that you need to make the dye that makes the purple wool, and the tchelis, the blue wool, very expensive, very hard to find because it's always buried in the sand. And the white gems that are in the sea and in the sand. That's the blessing that Zevulun gets. And the commentaries puzzle over this. Zevulun's going to do business. He'll go out and do commerce and trade and engage with other peoples and do a lot of business. But the blessing specifically is that he's going to have the wealth of the treasures that are hidden in the sand. Why is his blessing specifically that he'll have the wealth that's hidden, that's buried, that's burrowed in the sand? So my grandfather, of blessed memory, said something very profound. Zebulun, he was rich. He was a mogul. He was a titan of industry, a philanthropist who recognized the value of Torah. And he made a bargain. He made an agreement to split with Yisachar. Half my wealth goes to you. Half your Torah comes to me. Zebulun knew the secret value of Torah. He knew that Torah study, that's what gives life to the world. That's what animates the world. That's what brings vitality to the world. The world stands on three things. And the first thing is Torah. The world only endures because of Torah. Torah is a pipeline that connects this world to heaven on high. We spoke about how the Torah there's two formats to Torah. There's the format that's given to us, that's designed for us. And then there's the format of Torah that's in the heavens. And both formats are still true. If you go to heaven, the roots of Torah still lie there. The roots are still a Torah that's the black fire top of white fire. It's still called a Torah of God, even though we have it. When you study Torah, you're engaging with God's most precious treasure. So every word of Torah study, it's a pull request to heaven. Because you're summoning some of the power, some of the vitality, some of the greatness that's in heaven. So you study Torah here, and you're pulling down from heaven. And that's like a connection between this world and heaven. And that creates a pipeline. And through that pipeline flows all the vitality of this world. Indeed, the world stands on Torah because absent Torah, the world would cease to exist. Now, the analogy for this is a beautiful lamp. It can illuminate the whole room. But the lamp has a wire that's so unsightly, it ruins the feng shui of the room. It kills the vibe. We want the light, but we don't want the unsightly wire. It's an eyesore. So the enterprising designer will just simply snip the wire. It's doing nothing for us. But of course, the wire, that's what brings the vitality, the energy, the electricity, the current that illuminates the lamp. You snip the wire, you're plunged into darkness. Torah is the wire, is the pipeline, is the connection that unites our world with the source of all life, of all vitality in heaven. You snip the wire, the world goes dark. But a lot of people are like that enterprising designer. They don't appreciate the wire. It seems like a waste of resources, they may say, because the Torah's value, its power, is hidden. You want to raise awareness, you want to raise attention, you want to raise funds for other causes. It's easy, relatively. A museum, an art museum, it's easy. An NGO that does some valuable work with a small side of embezzlement, extremely well funded, flush with cash. Try raising money to support Torah, to disseminate Torah. It's very hard because people say it's unsightly. It doesn't do anything for me. To get support for the yeshiva, it's very hard. Its value is hidden, and only those who have keen insight can appreciate it. Only those who sense, who understand how valuable, how cherished, how wonderful, how indispensable it is. Only they have the privilege of supporting it. Zebulun is someone who saw the beauty, the richness, the treasure that was burrowed in the sand, that was secretive, that was hidden from the eyes of the masses. Most people didn't see the value in it. He was the one who said, I'm going to take upon myself the responsibility of making sure the Torah flourishes, that Issachar, the one who's dedicated in the tent, he will have everything he needs. I'm going to invest in this hidden treasure. Moshe tells him, be happy, be joyous, Yisachar. Be happy, be joyous, Zevulun. You're both doing something wonderful. Zevulun, you're going to be rewarded, measure for measure. He saw the treasure that was hidden, and God repaid him with the treasure that is hidden. As we wrap up year 9 of the Parsha Podcast, I think we could say something similar to that about ourselves. We too, on our own level, we recognize the value of Torah. We recognize that this is something we want to dedicate part of our day towards, part of our life towards. We've been exposed to the beauty, to the richness, to the delight, to the purity, to the power, to the elevation of Torah. Indeed, how fortunate are we to have this privilege. May we all merit to continue studying the Almighty's Holy Torah, to continue burrowing deep into its depths, to be worthy of being ones who appreciate this secret, this hidden treasure. May we merit to study the Almighty's Holy Torah for another year, please God, and hopefully for many years to come, in good health and in great spirits. Have a marvelous festival, a magnificent Shabbos. We're all looking forward to much, much more Torah and Parsha backstage in year 10 of the Parsha Podcast with the unending help of the Almighty. And you know already, my email address is rabbiwalby@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions, your comments, and your feedback.